Thank you, Martin, and thank you to the Heritage Group for inviting me back. And today, as the title says, we're going to do a journey through time, travelling from Manchester up to Cheetham Hill. And I know some of you in here do know where that is. Martin's just, I was going to put a little quiz out to see if anyone knew, but Martin's already explained. So this is Cheetham Hill, and looking towards the halfway house, and just back here on that side you'd have Woodlands Road, and on this side Darlington Street, and that was taken around about 1910ish, not by myself, wasn't around here then. So we'll move on. I'm going to go back over the last 250 years to start with, and how we would have got to Cheetham Hill from Manchester before the main road, Cheetham Hill Road, was built, or York Street as it was called initially. And I'm going to start with some maps, because maps are brilliant. They explain a lot of things. A map is worth 1,000 words, really. So this first map I'm starting with is from 1788. And it's got overlaid on it some streets. Now these were overlaid later on, and just to give you an idea where this is, you can see this dotted line coming along here. This is the lower part of Cheetham Hill Road. This is Elizabeth Street Junction here, so that will go down to Red Bank. And Cheetham Hill Road, as we know it, comes down here to New Bridge Street. Derby Street runs roughly around here. That building there is the workhouse, and Victoria railway station's on that site now. And this is the River Irk, and these were the streets that were laid out for the Red Bank area as it was developing following the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, when Cheetham started really becoming an area of a residential area and a business area as well. And just away from Cheetham Hill Road at the moment, I'll just mention as well on this map, where you've got the River Irk, it splits, not now, but at one time it used to split, and you had an island in the middle of it down Colliers Road called Travis Island, and they used to have a mill on there, and in times gone by people would take the wheat to the mill to have it ground into flour. But all traces of that have long gone since they built the railways, and even down in Red Bank there's the railway runs straight through the middle of all this now as well. So just moving on, coming a bit more up to date with another map. This is Piglets Map of 1813, just to show you Strangeways had a hall at one time where the prison is now. They used to have Strangeways Hall on there. And I've included this one because this one shows you from 1813. Here's the bottom end of Cheetham Hill Road before it was laid out yet again. This is New Bridge Street. This is where the arena is now in Victoria Station, and the road would go down towards Corporation Street, down that way. And coming a little bit more up to date, 1819. Now this map is showing Cheetham Hill Road was called York Street when they first built it, up as far as Elizabeth Street. So it shows here York Street up to where Elizabeth Street is now, and that area was known as Stocks. And you can follow your journey up past the Temple, Smedley Lane here, up Green Hill and up to Cheetham Hill Village. And just zoom in on that one a little bit, because this shows you as well in a bit more detail. This is where Victoria Station is now, but in them days it was the workhouse, New Bridge Street and Cheetham Hill Road up to, it was called Stocks that area because they did have punishment stocks for Cheetham on that junction where Elizabeth Street is now. And the Temple, we all know where the Temple is, or was, in the case of the cinema and the pub. So that's just to give you an idea of where we're going to be travelling. We're going to be travelling from Corporation Street up to Cheetham Hill Village. So to set the scene of what Cheetham Hill was like 200 years ago, there's an extract here that I found in an old newspaper, Manchester City News of 1924, but it's also been reproduced on the internet. And I'll just read it out. In the early decades of the last century, that was the 1800s, Cheetham Hill was a quiet rural village divided from Manchester by a roadway along which passed very little traffic. An occasional farmer's cart or perchance, a postchaise and the York Mail, together with a few other coaches, were the only vehicles that passed through the sleepy little village. We're talking about Cheetham Hill here, being a sleepy little village. At night the road was entirely unlighted, and the number of houses between New Bridge Street to Halliwell Lane did not exceed a score in all. There was little pedestrian traffic after dark. For those who were able and willing to pay the cost, a pair-horse coach could be hired in St Anne's Square. The fare, however, was 5 shillings to Cheetham Hill. But in addition to this, toll bar costs 8 pence. That would be at the temple, that's where they had a toll. And the driver expected 6pence for a drink. So needless to say, the pair-horse vehicle from the town were not often seen in the village of Cheetham Hill. And we are not surprised to read, therefore, that highway robberies were somewhat common in the 20s, that's the 1820s. But it was not until a Mr. Ruddock was shot that the better class inhabitants made a move towards making a travelling along the highway more safe. A private watch was established, the watch consisting of 2 watchmen of ancient type. Each of these carried a lantern and a heavy stick, and small watch boxes were placed, one at the stocks and one at Halliwell Lane. Persons out late at night would, if alone, wait at the corner of the workhouse for the watchman coming on his downbeat, and he would accompany them along the road. So that gives you an idea of what Cheetham Hill was like in the 1820s. So going to come a little bit more up to date now. So for those who recognise coming up to Cheetham Hill from town in this present day and age, Junction of Corporation Street, I took this picture last year, and this is the bridge where the railway runs underneath. Victoria Station is on the left. Strange ways there you can see as well. Now I don't know if any of the gents in here remember that sort of junction from before 1970, because it's hard to believe that in the middle of that junction there used to be a gentleman's toilet. Now if they had that there today, you'd be risking life and limb to go and spend a penny. But that was the same spot where I took the photo, the previous photo, and I think they probably placed that there because the River Irk is culverted directly underneath there. And needless to say,
I've just noticed that. Any idea what that is there?
No,
That's
is the answer to that.
Isn't it?
It seems quite high up. I honestly don't know, Martin, what that building is, but one I can look into. So that picture, by the way, I think was around about 1959 when that one was taken. Again, not by myself, but... So as we move up Cheetham Hill Road now, the corner of New Bridge Street, this is a car park on the corner to the arena, and Victoria Station is just to the left here. And if you were to look back at that same spot up until around about the mid-70s, you would have seen a garage on that corner. Don't know how many of you remember seeing that as you're passing on the bus coming up to Cheetham Hill, but that's the exact spot where the car park is now, with New Bridge Street on the corner. And just to pan the camera around a little bit, so this is the present day. That is now a snooker hall there, but it was a car showroom. New Bridge Street, there used to be a pub here called the Bolton Arms, and you can see the edge of what used to be the Jewish synagogue. And then if we just go back in time for that junction, there is what is the snooker room now, and just going down New Bridge Street, the Bolton Arms, and the corner of the garage I showed you on the previous shot. So Cheetham Hill Road today is definitely the lower end of it, at least nothing like it was even 10 years ago, because as we come up Cheetham Hill Road now, I'm stood on the corner of Lord Street here looking back towards Manchester, and I don't know if any of you have been down that way over the last 5 years or so, but you've got all these office blocks, houses, apartments going up. And I took this picture in 2017, but this shows how quick it's all developing, because if you go down today, there's another huge block there now. They've got the crane there just starting on it. But if you just visualise that location and then just go back to the same spot, and this was 1959 this, so you've got New Bridge Street there with the garage I showed you in an earlier shot. And I can actually remember these buildings being here in the early 70s, so it was sometimes probably late 70s they demolished them. And
sorry, what? Because of where we are, the very first Ukrainian club was roughly where that car's parked at the side of the road. It was a very,
this one, Martin?
Yeah, roughly there. Number 54, I think it was.
Okay.
But it was the very first.
Are you sure about the number? Because I'm going to talk about the numbering in a moment.
Oh, it changed, didn't it?
Right. So then you had a gap, and then you had a couple more buildings. This was 1986, this. Now, the numbering that I have for these, number 20 Cheetham Hill Road was where Michael Marks, one half of Marks and Spencer's, had his first shop. But the way the numbering goes, I've got the even numbers on the right as you come up, so I would suspect that it was in that row somewhere from the previous shot up to here. Maybe wrong, but that is my guess from the numbering. And Michael Marks, just to tell you a bit about him, if you go on websites for Marks and Spencer's, they give a lot of credit to Leeds for Marks and Spencer's, saying the first store was there, he lived there. But he was a Polish Jew, and he came to the UK in 1882. And in 1893, he was living at 135 Cheetham Hill Road, which is just up by the Derby Street Junction. And in 1894, he set up with Tom Spencer. He was a silent partner that funded him to create the Marks and Spencer's store as we know it. In 1897, they opened a warehouse and a store on Derby Street. A head office and a warehouse on Derby Street. And in 1903, it became a limited company. And here is some sort of slip that they issued, and it just shows where the registered offices were, Derby Street, Cheetham. So there's not really enough credit to Cheetham for Marks and Spencer's on a lot of the websites, because it all seems to go over to Leeds. He definitely was a local person settling in this area, and he actually died on 31st of December 1907 at number 396 Bury New Road in Broughton, and he's buried not too far from here in the Jewish cemetery at the bottom of Crescent Road at the back of Crumpsall Hospital. So that's where he is.
You see the telegram address at the top there? Pennies. So there's a Penny Bazaar. So the telegram address was Pennies.
The St Michael's brand that probably most of you would have heard of, that came about because after he died, his son took over running the business, and he created the brand as a tribute to Michael, his father, St Michael's, and that's where the brand came from, that they kept for many decades until they dropped it. I think the 90s they dropped it. So just going back now on the opposite side of the road as we come away from New Bridge Street, this for decades now has been various different retail premises or offices. And it actually started its life as a Wesley Methodist chapel built in 1840. And then the central synagogue took it over in 1895 until it closed. I don't have the date it actually closed as a synagogue. And then just to the right of this building, so there's the one we've just been looking at, you've got a retail premises at the moment. Well, you may not know that at one time this building was a hospital. It was part of this building at the back, and that was an extension onto Cheetham Hill Road. And it opened, the one at the back opened in 1867, and it was known as the Northern Hospital for Women and Children. And the entrance was down Park Place at the side, just off Cheetham Hill Road. So you got these buildings that were the hospital and the one on the front. So the one on the front opened in 1892, and all this complex closed in 1933 when the new Northern Hospital was opened just near Shirley Road. In 2009, planning permission was given to convert that into a hotel. I think I'd like to see it converted into something rather than falling derelict and then demolished. Happy to say it's still standing, the building, and some business premises have taken it over and it's not been turned into a hotel. But just to give you a side view here, that was a picture I took in, I think, 2012, and from the same spot when it was a hospital, and it's hardly changed much at all, you know, with the doorway and the window above there as well. This was on Park Place, which is a little cul-de-sac, and just at the side of this, at the head of it, there's no trace of it now, there was a carriage works called Anne Cowburn's. And just to tell you a little bit about this, because it was quite world renowned for its quality of carriages it made. And Anne Cowburn, she took it over after her husband died in 1851. And it was her husband and her father-in-law who ran the business from a little works on Todd Street in Manchester near Victoria Station. But she must have had quite a business head on her that she developed this new building on Park Place. Apparently became quite well renowned. I'll just show you one of the carriages he made to give you an idea of what they were producing. They were more for personal use rather than the big stagecoach carriages. And occasionally you see these on the internet up for sale, and they're for thousands of pounds. You know, they're a real collector's piece. So Anne Cowburn's, that opened in 1868, but there's certainly no trace of that there now. So just coming back onto Cheetham Hill Road, so here's the buildings that we looked at from the other direction. We're looking up towards Cheetham Hill now. You've got St Chad's Church. The buildings I showed you earlier on, where I said Michael Marks had his first shop, would have been somewhere just along here. And there's a photo from the same spot from 1959. And it was quite a thriving community back in them days, because there was a residential area on the streets down into Red Bank still, and you had a lot of businesses on Cheetham Hill Road on the front. There's a building here, that one I think it is, that I can tell from the roof. That was the first purpose-built Jewish school in Cheetham Hill. There was another one prior to that, but it was a building that they converted for use. So that one was opened in 1851. In 1874, the school moved to another purpose-built one on Derby Street, which has since closed and been demolished. And just another view, just a little bit closer up to St Chad's. not many pubs left in the area now between town and Cheetham Hill, but there was one there, I don't know if anyone remembers that, it was called the Pleasant Inn. And St Chad's, just to give you an idea of when that was built, that was 1847. And it seems that most of the renowned buildings started going up in the 1840s, so that would indicate that Cheetham Hill Road, or York Street as it was known then, was probably not finished being built properly until around about the 1830s or thereabouts. If I'm going too fast, or if anyone wants to go back to the previous slide to ask anything, feel free to just shout out. So the journey today, I'm stood outside the old town hall here now, looking back towards town again with St Chad's. And the buildings here, so there's St Chad's, built 1847, and there's a synagogue here, the red brick one. That was the new Congregational Synagogue, built in 1889. But this one, that's wholesalers now called Cleopatra Trading, that was in fact a library at the time, and one of the first free libraries in Manchester. And as you can see from here, Cheetham branch, Manchester Free Library, erected, it's just off the end, 1876. So again, I'm very glad that that building was preserved, even though it's being used for some sort of business venture, at least it's preserved the building. This picture some of you may have seen before, it's floating about, it's in the libraries, it's on the internet, and I thought it would be good to use this tonight because it's showing you from the same spot as my previous one. So there's what was the library, the synagogue, St Chad's. And I guess looking at it, you've got a horse-drawn tram here. The electric trams weren't really introduced till about 1902, so this might be the last decade of the 1800s. And there's a number of stagecoaches here. I think I can count 3. And even in them days, a bit like buses today, you get none come for a while and then 3 come together. So you even had that in them days as well. And I would guess that because there was trams to Cheetham Hill from Albert Square at that time, the stagecoaches were probably going more of a longer distance, maybe Bury or beyond, or in fact just going back to the beginning, when I showed you the maps with Red Bank, that was the only route out of Manchester north at the time before Cheetham Hill Road was built, and anyone going to north, even up to Scotland, would have travelled along that route. So even though Cheetham Hill was a sleepy village, you would have got a lot of long distance traffic, horses and stagecoaches passing through there at the time. Just to go back to it, this building here was another Jewish synagogue. There is a picture of that one. That one, yeah, I've not actually written down the name of that one, and they had quite a lot, so I don't want to get confused.
Great and new.
The Great
And new.
and New, right, because I know there's that many different ones, Central, Great, and I didn't want to give it the wrong title. So that was more or less opposite the town hall, the old Cheetham town hall. And there's an older picture of it before it was converted into a restaurant. And on the side of it, there was like a living accommodation built on the side of it. So even after the town hall was no longer used, I remember that people were still living in the house at the premises. Maybe they were caretakers. And this building was built between 1853 and 55, and it's a Grade 2 listed building now. So they were probably, when they were converting it to a restaurant, there was probably a lot of conditions attached to them being able to do that, because it's very difficult to be able to do any modernisation or anything to a listed building. And just next door to that, you can just see the gable end of it was what was called the Prestwich Union offices. Now this isn't union like with work unions, the workhouses operated under what was called unions in those days. Locally you had the Manchester Union and the Prestwich Union. And the Prestwich Union, for which these were the offices, they had a workhouse on the site where Crumpsall Hospital was. North Manchester, it's now known. And the Manchester Union had the workhouse on New Bridge Street, where Victoria Station is now, and also what became Springfield Hospital, now part of the North Manchester complex, which is now the head office for the trust, for the Pennine Acute Trust, I think it is. They keep amalgamating and changing names that I lose track with what is what. But I used to go there in the late 1960s. It had been closed for a while, and they reopened it as a youth centre. And it was called the Noel Timpson Centre, if anyone remembers that. And I used to go there for a couple of years in the early 70s. And then that eventually closed. It was empty for a long time, and now it's like most buildings there. It's some sort of business property. Next door to that, you can just see a little bit of a garage. This picture, by the way, I took this in 1986. So this is more recent. This was last year, and the garage had been converted into a car wash now. But on this spot, long before the garage, there was a building called the Manchester Assembly Rooms. And this was demolished in 1966. It was built in 1857. And when it was demolished, I'll just show you some of the interior pictures first to show you how grand it was. A lot of the elitists used to have all the functions and the balls and the gatherings in the building, and there was a lot of ornate sort of plasterwork and architecture in there. There's another one of the interior, and I know it's on there. Someone brought the pedal bike in, probably to take the photos. And the guy who actually owned this, it was an individual, and when he died it passed to his son in 1966, and the son demolished it, and he was asked why he demolished it, and his reason that he gave was that he couldn't afford to pay his father's death duties, and there was more money in the land by having a garage on it, a petrol station, and that was what he did. He demolished it and built a petrol station on the site. Now this was on the corner of Derby Street, so we're going to do a little detour from Cheetham Hill Road and just go down Derby Street. Without me saying anything, how many hands up know what that building is? Because a lot of us used to go there. It was the ice rink, Derby Street Ice Palace. It's got at the top there Manchester Ice Palace, and like many, I went there when I was so small, ice skating, and there you go. Does that bring back some memories for those of you who went there?
Didn't they hold some Olympic event there? Ice skating event?
Right, I don't know.
Very, very early days.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Part of the Olympics.
Yeah.
Or certainly international.
Yeah, because there weren't too many ice rinks around. There still isn't today, to be honest with you. This one opened on Derby Street in 1910, and it closed in 1967. And this again now has been converted. The building's still there. It's been converted into some sort of business venture. And just coming out onto Derby Street, this is a picture of Derby Street from round about the first decade. Yeah, while the Romans were still here. Yeah, the first decade of the 1900s, and the ice rink would have been just after this building on that spot. And this is the new police station at the time that was built on Derby Street. This was probably around about 1905 that this was taken. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to talk a little bit about law and order in Cheetham Hill in times gone by, because when I set the scene for what Cheetham Hill was like, I talked about a watchman and they had a box, one at Stocks and one at Halliwell Lane. And the watchman was basically, because the pay was so minimal, they were doing the job for next to nothing. It was mainly older people that would just do it for an extra couple of pennies. And this is typical of the box. There'd have been one on the corner of where Elizabeth Street meets Cheetham Hill Road now, facing towards town. And there'd have been another one of these on the corner of Halliwell Lane, Cheetham Hill Road, where Progress Buildings is, facing this way. And the watchmen, there was two of them, they'd only mainly work evenings. And the beat, the one from the Stocks at Elizabeth Street, in fact it was called Dirty Lane in them days. Elizabeth Street didn't exist as we know it. It was more of a track and it was known as Dirty Lane. So the watchman on his beat there, because York Street, Cheetham Hill Road hadn't been completed then, he'd go down through Red Bank to meet people near Corporation Street, Long Mill Gate, and then he'd escort them back up past his own box to the Temple Bar, the Temple Pub, Temple Cinema. There used to be a toll bar there. So he would then go to the Temple Bar, where he would time it to meet with the other watchman from Halliwell Lane on his downbeat, and they'd take over, and the one from Halliwell Lane would escort people then up to as far as White Smithy, which we know it as Halfway House these days. Manchester didn't have a police force as such until 1839. That's when the first police force was created. It did have police commissioners before that who employed people as police officers. And the problem Cheetham had, it was a growing community and it was getting a reputation for crime because of the squalor around Red Bank. People were working for next to nothing in the mills, and you used to get the elitists who were the bank owners and mill owners that had the mansions around Cheetham and Crumpsall, and they were travelling into Manchester, and they've got all this wealth, and you've got people with next to nothing seeing them passing through. So there was a lot of robbery, highway robbery in them days, and the idea was that these watchmen escorted people going into Manchester or coming out of Manchester as well.
Is that a rattle stuck in it?
They used to have a rattle, and if you can imagine the noise a rattle makes, and that would be to draw attention if there was issues. There'd be no street lighting in them days, so we'd have to have a really good lantern. You can see the size of it, but even that would only light the immediate area. They'd have a stick, and some of them would have a cutlass as well to try and ward off anyone trying to attack them. Now the first police station in Cheetham, what was the one I showed you a few slides back on Derby Street, and that one opened in 1890. Before that there was a lot of issues, because for any problems there were around Cheetham, police would have to travel from the nearest police station, which was Oldham Road in them days. So the police commissionaires, they used to pay for a house at the Temple, at the side of the Temple pub as we know it, which was the toll bar in them days, for a married police couple and 3 single officers. So that was accommodation for them, so that they could be based where they live, to make it easier for them to police the area. But that was only a temporary thing, and they were looking at other accommodation. They were looking at setting up a police station in the Cheetham Town Hall, but that never materialised neither. Now the one on Derby Street, which is this one, which is a better view of it, it opened 1890. It closed just after the war, around the late 1940s, and stayed in use since then for many other business ventures until it was demolished around about late 1960s, about 68 or something like that. And I think just like today, government and local government, you look at trying to save money wherever they can, and the first organisations to get hit are the police. And it was no different in them days really, and I think they demolished it, well they didn't demolish it, but they closed it down to save money. And what they did at the beginning of the early 1950s around not just Cheetham Hill but around Manchester, they built a number of very small police stations. They had one on Humphrey Street, for those who remember that, same design. This one was Knowsley Street. I took this picture in '86, and I think it was there up until about 1990, this building, before it was flattened. And you would have had it in there, an enquiry counter, you'd have had a cell, all compact and basic really, and a little kitchen and toilet. So there was this one on Knowsley Street, and another one, as I say, up on Humphrey Street as well, which we'll come to in a short while. Now this side of Cheetham Hill Road was mainly commercial, but there were some residential properties down in between Derby Street and Knowsley Street that were known as the dwellings. I don't know if anyone knew about these, called Lancaster House and York House. And I think these were here until probably about 1980 when they were demolished. So what we're going to do now, we're going to come back out onto Cheetham Hill Road again, and a couple of older buildings that are no longer there. This one was the United Synagogue, another one that started its life as a Methodist chapel, built 1904 and eventually demolished in 1987. This is just past Derby Street now, on the left as we're coming up to Cheetham Hill Road. All these houses are gone. There's a number of residential properties. Some had started to convert to businesses. I think the Jewish Gazette was printed in one of them, and the RSPCA had offices there. The post office on the corner of Elizabeth Street, I think. So we'll just continue a little bit further on. Here we're on the corner of Broughton Street. This is a picture I took about a year or two ago, and it's just to show you from this spot. I took another picture back in '86 of the same spot, and there was this old building, if anyone who remembers it. It was that ramshackle, that building. I'm sure a good gale and the lot would have just blown down. They were really...
Inside there was some fantastic old detail, the plaster corners.
I can believe it.
The staircase was this wonderful serpentine handrail going up. It was absolutely stunning.
Yeah, because they were lovely buildings, all of these, in the time, and to lose them.
From that shop, a friend of mine that had the staircase into his house.
Oh, so that was saved then, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The bath on the corner.
Was that the one on the other side, Martin? There was one on the other side of Cheetham Hill Road.
Was that both sides?
Yeah, there was another Marx's, wasn't there, on the other side, just a bit lower down as well.
Yeah, I was trying to get my head around that, which way we were looking. Yeah. Right, okay.
So what I'm doing here, I'm crossing over Cheetham Hill Road as we're going up. So I'm going to cross back over now to the other side of Cheetham Hill Road, and you got the edge of the Jewish Museum there. That was originally the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. But again, just to show you a comparison from the same spot, that was last year, and this was 1959. You got just the corner there of the Synagogue Museum. So these were the buildings that were on that spot, and then you had a BP garage here, and then North Street where Kennings is. And now we've reached the junction of Elizabeth Street, and I love this picture because there's so much in it. It's so different from this spot today. Things have changed so much. The post office you mentioned on the corner, and I think there was a Midland Bank next to it as well. So this is Elizabeth Street, and back in the day when I was talking about watchmen and the boxes, there would have been one on this corner here. This was Dirty Lane going down to where the Jewish hospital was built down there as well. And this next one was Haywood Street, because that used to come right the way down and link up with Cheetham Hill Road. And
It used to come all the way down. It stops now.
The one after that one.
no, that one.
Elizabeth
This one's
Street,
Elizabeth Street, and then it
Right
was
after each other.
Haywood Street.
And
Not,
then they turned it and made the junction of Queen's Road.
yeah, they changed the
Yeah,
junction.
they
I'll
changed
show
the
you.
direction.
I'll show you something in a minute as well about the junction with Queen's Road. On the right hand side, you've got North Street coming down that would have gone down to Red Bank. You can just see a bit of what was the bowling alley there.
The Odeon.
Before the bowling alley, the Odeon. The church is on the corner. It's not St Luke's, that, for those trying to get the bearings. It was called the Victorian Methodist Church. It was on the corner of Queen's Road. So the Victorian Methodist Church was demolished in 1965 because part of the spire fell down, it collapsed. I'll just come a little bit more up to date with that one. That one's 1939, or rather I'll go further back in time with the next one to 1905. This is nearly the same angle. You've got Elizabeth Street to the left, there's the Victorian Methodist, North Street coming down here, and this building here is on the spot where I think there's a Marks and Spencer's food hall at the moment, and the Manchester Fort shopping area is there. So that was before the Odeon Cinema stroke bowling alley was built. And then just coming more up to date, 1965 now, and this is more or less the same spot. The Victorian Methodist Church has gone, but that one in the distance is St Luke's, corner of Smedley Lane, and the bowling alley as it was in 65. Car showroom, I think it was called Lex. And just down this road here, you probably noticed from travelling up and down, because it was really a bit of a landmark. We used to have British road services with all their wagons and everything. And then coming up to date. So as it is today, this is North Street, and DRS, British Road Services, was directly down there and they built over it. And if you can imagine going back around about 250, 300 years to this spot, just to the left of where the tree is, there was an old house called Stocks, and it probably took its name from the punishment stocks that were on that junction. Can't find an exact date for when this was built, but there's records of it being there in the late 1500s, and it had several elitist occupants, elitist as I call them, people with money and high society. And Charles Dickens was a friend of one of them, Gilbert Winter he was called. He was one of the guys, to show you what standing he had in society. He was one of the funders of the Liverpool to Manchester Railway when it was built. And Charles Dickens used to come here and stay here a lot because he was a friend of his. And it's claimed that when he wrote some of his books, some of the characters were named, written based around people he knew from coming to stay in Manchester. And I think one of them was, I'm not a reader of literature, and I've never read any Dickens, but I think there was one called Nicholas Nickleby. Is that one where there's something called the Cheeryble Brothers?
Yes.
Right, and apparently they were based on characters that he knew from staying at Stock's house. And this was demolished probably the second half of the 1800s. And then just a little bit to the left of where this was, we'll come on to the Odeon Cinema. And later became the bowling alley. So this building, it was built in 1931 as a cinema, and its first name was the Riviera Cinema Deluxe, if anyone remembers that before my time. It was called that, and then in 1938 it was acquired by Odeon Cinemas, who changed the name to the Odeon, and in 1961 it closed as a cinema and reopened as a bowling alley until it eventually closed in 1971. What I'm thinking of doing, Martin, we're getting near to Queen's Road. As soon as I get to Queen's Road in the next couple of slides, we'll have a break, because I'm getting a bit hoarse, and we can have a drink and then carry on the second part of the journey. That is a picture of the front of it when it was the bowling alley. That's how I remember it when I used to go bowling there. So here we've reached the Queen's Road junction, just looking back at the Odeon as it was then before the bowling alley. And just on that junction with Queen's Road there was a garage, and then I remember a cafe here, and then other buildings. As we worked our way around the corner onto Queen's Road, I remember Vera's Florist very well, and there was a newsagent's, and I remember outside, because we used to get the 53 to Bellevue, we used to go to Speedway a lot, and they used to have a machine outside that shop that sold cartons of chilled milk or orange juice, and I think it was 6 old pence, and I used to enjoy getting an orange juice out of there. I used to love their orange juice. And they also had a cigarette machine, but in this day and age that had disappeared in the night. that wouldn't have lasted this day and age. And the 53 bus, that was the terminus, it used to turn round there. But now this day and age there's a big McDonald's on all this site as well. So I think what we'll do, Martin, I'll take a break there, and if you want to refresh and give us a shout when you're ready, and I'll continue part 2.
Right, thanks very much.
Okay. And during the break I learnt some fascinating information thanks to these 2 lovely ladies here. The Odeon, the Odeon Cinema, the Odeon was started by a local guy called Oscar Dyke, D-E-I-C-H, and the name Odeon comes from Oscar Dyke Entertains Our Nation,
Wow.
which is what Odeon means. So thank you for that snippet of information there. Very interesting.
It's like an old Roman or Greek name.
Yeah.
You know, like Hippodrome.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
He was
fascinating.
I think so. I know his family sitting there here.
Oh, brilliant.
Okay, so we're at Queen's Road at the moment, and on Queen's Road we've got the bus depot just down Queen's Road on the left hand side. And just another little snippet of information, the bus depot opened as a tram depot in 1900, and it was opened by a local councillor called Daniel Boyle, hence where we get the name Boyle Street up the side of it, so you know where the name Boyle Street comes from now as well. So we're back onto Cheetham Hill Road. This is last year, St Luke's there, Queen's Road. So this is where the Victorian Methodist Church was. This is where Temple Flats were, if you remember the Temple Flats. So let's just go back a little bit in time. So from the same spot, Victorian Methodist Church, just see a little bit of Temple Flats, and Queen's Road round to the right hand side.
Telephone boxes.
Yeah, who remembers telephone boxes? Go back a couple of decades and Queen's Road never used to go straight over like it does now. This was a T-junction, and there was a long row of houses right the way along across where Queen's Road goes straight through to Salford now. So there's a close-up of Temple Flats, St Luke's with the spire on still as well. And this is taken from Queen's Road, looking up Cheetham Hill Road. Now today, just round here, this is where Queen's Road goes straight across, but before they opened that up, there was a long row of terraced houses and some shops and hotel. And just to give you an idea so you can get your bearings, on this building you see how it's got an angled roof. Look out for that roof on the next shot and that will give you an idea of where it is. So there's the angled roof. So here's what was the green grass on the previous one. Here's the traffic lights.
Pantlin's bread shop.
Is it right?
Where the chemist is.
Yeah. So Queen's Road today goes straight through these buildings. And Queen's Road round to the right. The lighter colour building here is the Cresta Hotel, which like the Miller's Hotel, there's a couple of hotels on Cheetham Hill Road that to some people have been long gone and forgotten. Crossing again back over to the other side of the road, you got the Temple School, the old school, which is no longer there because they've got a new one. Let's get our bearings. Just over here on Smedley Lane now.
Did my first teaching practice. 1972.
Yep. Okay. And this building, all the kids used to dread this building. I know I dreaded it. I fainted in there at one stage. This was the dentist. And the guy who was the dentist there, I think his trade was a butcher. Because he just didn't care. He got in your mouth and he was doing that to get teeth out. And your head was going side to side and he didn't care. You know, he had no empathy or anything. So a nightmare for all kids who had to go there back in the
plus side
days.
of it, it was also the place you got welfare orange juice.
Okay, free orange juice. Yep. And then a landmark, I'm sure you'll all remember, just around the corner from here. So we've arrived at the Temple now. So you've got the Temple Cinema and the Temple Pub, and then just out a shot here, St Luke's. And the cinema opened in 1913 and closed in 1983. And I remember I went there many times on a Saturday afternoon to the matinees, as did a lot of kids in them days. This was where there was a toll booth at one stage before we had the trams, and there was an extra piece built onto the building that came out, and then that had the actual bar on that would swing to let the transport through when they paid the toll to carry on. I remember when I used to go to the Temple pictures here, this one was known as the Flea Pit, and you had the posh one called the Premier further up Cheetham Hill. But I remember this was a newsagent, so you go in there and you get your sweets first of all, and then I remember in later years this was a barber's shop on the other side. St Luke's, been in there quite a few times. My sister got married in there in 71. They took the spire down because it was quite dangerous. It was leaning, and they reckoned that if it wasn't taken down, it would just fall down at some stage. So they took it down. But what's left of it now is again a listed, I was going to say building, but it's not a building now, it's a shell, and it's quite sad the way that has been left to go the way it has done as well. An interesting fact about St Luke's, it opened in 1839, and at one stage after it opened it was the wealthiest church in the whole of the northwest of England. So it showed the type of people that were funding it, that were going there. And the elitists who did go there must have had some connections, because Mendelssohn, the composer, he consecrated the organ in the church in 1847, which was the same year he died. But he didn't die here, obviously, but he consecrated it before he died, not after he died. Okay, so we got Smedley Lane running round the back. Now this is the junction of Arms Hill Road from Cheetham Hill Road. I think, was this the house we mentioned when we were talking at one stage? The big old house. I took this in 1986 before this was demolished, and the garage there as well, that eventually went, and there's houses there now on that spot as well. And just to twist the camera around to look up Cheetham Hill Road and to go back in time a bit. So this is taken from the corner of the church. So you've got Smedley Lane to the right, Arms Hill Road going down and Cheetham Hill Road running up. And I lived down Arms Hill Road from 1963 when they built the newer houses down the bottom end. And remember this area very well. The shop there, a little grocer's, a lady called Mrs. Holt, went in there many a time running errands for me, mum and dad. And this row of shops as well, there was a little grocer's on the corner called Davison's, and because it was on the corner and it was tapered, it was so small you couldn't get more than 3 people in it, I don't think, at any one time. And over the years, I don't know why, but they seemed to demolish each shop in turn over the years. I know some of them had fires and different issues. So you got Davison's I was telling you about. Then you had a sort of, the shop there was some sort of tools shop. They sold hand tools and things. And then you had a stamp and coin shop. I used to enjoy looking in the window there. Then a chemist. I can't remember whether that was chemist or that one, but one of them was. And then this shop here was a sort of gents outfitters. So over the years, these shops have sort of got demolished one by one, and I think at the moment they're up to the last 2 or 3. I remember there was a fire there back in 2012 where one of these went and they demolished it, and those houses there were demolished I think in the 70s as well because they were unsafe, or that was the excuse. Some people may remember that from passing. That was next to Miller's Hotel, excuse me. The guy who started this, Stanley Langer, I don't know if you know him, he was one of the guys who started hospital radio at Crumpsall Hospital in 1960. And I know his son Dave Langer, I don't know if you know the Langer families.
One of the girls from Cheetham Hill married him when he went bankrupt.
Right. The claim was that this actually closed because he was a specialist in marble and there was a shortage of marble, and he had great difficulty in keeping the business going, and so he had no option but to close it down. And looking back over the other side of the road as well, another landmark you'll probably all remember, Northern Hospital. Most people who lived around the area probably ended up in there for one reason or another. I had my tonsils out, and I know I visited many a time. My mother and father were in there, and when I had a paper round when I was 13 for the newsagents at the bottom of Cardinal Street, he had the delivery round, the paper round in the hospital, so I ended up going round again, taking papers round to the wards. And for those of you who had been in there, and just to bring back a memory, do you remember that long corridor? When you went through that main door at the front of the building, it was a long corridor down to the wards up at the end, and you always had that smell of ether, and it was sort of echoing as you walk along, and a bit depressing. So I just sort of bring that memory back to you. Coming away from the hospital now, back over the other side of the road, we saw the flea pit at the temple earlier on. Now we've got the posh one, the Premier.
Do we know about who called it the Premier, who called it the Premier? Premier.
Yeah, it's like, is it berry or burry? Tomato or tomato? Okay, so some facts about the Premier. Cinema. Yeah, opened in 1925 and it closed in 1970. But just a quick quiz here. Does anybody remember what the last film was that was, not you Martin, anyone else remember what the last film was to be shown there? No? Well, it was a double bill, and one of them was Kes, is that the one you know? And the 1,000 Plane Raid. I've never heard of that one, but that was the other one that was on with it. And then just coming over the other side of the road from there, we've got the row of shops, all these greengrocers now. all these buildings. But this one, which in the 70s, my mum used to go there, it was a bingo hall. And I remember going there. Next to it you had the billiard hall, and then what is the Trinity Church? Well, what was the bingo hall was also a cinema as well. Cheetham Hill had loads of cinemas.
That was originally called the Premium.
Yeah, that's right.
Before they built the
Before
new
it,
and that became the
yeah,
Green Hill.
exactly, yeah. So, the Green Hill, yeah. So that one was built 1915 when it opened as a cinema. It closed as a cinema in 1962. And another question, testing Martin's brain now. What was the last film to be shown? I wouldn't expect anyone to
I wasn't
know.
allowed to go to the Green Hill.
Okay, it was the Guns of Navarone.
Okay.
So there you go. Yeah, and then became a bingo hall, and eventually now it's retail, greengrocers. Trinity Church, that was built in 1899. I'll show you a picture that may surprise you. If you could imagine a time when those buildings were not there, and just a little bit further back there was a house called Green Hill Hall. Whoops, wrong one. Just teasing you a little bit more there. I'm ahead of myself. So yeah, there's the cinema, there's the billiard hall. So imagine that they're not there, and what we had before them was this marvellous building. Hard to believe that that was on the site. It was built by one banker called Samuel Jones in the 17-somethings, and through marriage into the different families, when the Joneses died out, one of the daughters married into the Lloyds, and it became the property of the Lloyd family, who were bankers as well. And the bank that the Lloyds had, it's not the Lloyds we know today. There was a banking company called Entwistle Lloyd in the 1800s, and they had a bank on King Street in Manchester, which is still there, the building. On the paved area where they've got the shops, there's like an oldish house looking. It's a retail property at the moment, Gents Clothes, and that was one of the banks that family ran at the time. Eventually fell into disrepair and was demolished, and houses were built on there. The houses between Green Hill Road and Esmond Road, all that area around there was built over it. And just coming on to the junction of Green Hill Road, Cheetham Hill Road, Waterloo Road, Halliwell Lane, and this is the corner of Waterloo Road, Halliwell Lane there. And at the moment there's like a little gardens on the corner, if it's still there, is it? Yeah. Before the gardens was this house, and the house was called Stone Wall, and that is another house that has had a lot of history going back to the 1700s. And it was the home of a guy called Thomas Henshaw, who was the founder of Henshaw's School for the Blind school, and he left £20,000 in his will, £40,000 in his will when he died, to create a home or somewhere to help blind people. And when he died, his wife contested the will, because she obviously wanted the money and it going to a charity. And it took several years for the hearings to go through court, and eventually the courts ruled in favour of his will, and the £40,000 then went to building Henshaw's School for the Blind at Old Trafford. One of the daughters of Thomas Henshaw from there married into the Lloyds from the previous picture as well. So around that time they all sort of knew each other quite well, the families, and there was a lot of getting married in between them. So that's Waterloo Road carrying on down. The tram lines are here now, so this is after 1900. For sale sign on there, so that probably sometime before it was actually demolished, because Thomas Henshaw died in 1810 and his widow died in 1836. So the house probably went through other members of the family until it was eventually sold and maybe demolished. And just coming back onto the corner here, Cheetham Hill Road looking up now, Progress Buildings on the corner of Halliwell Lane, and we're probably in the first decade of the 1900s. You got the tower of the swimming baths and the public hall as you're going up Cheetham Hill Road. Woodland Street would be off to the right, and just turning the camera down, looking back down towards Waterloo Road area. So you've got the swimming baths with the tower and the public hall. The Griffin, went swimming there many a time as a child. We used to go from school. I went to Cravenwood School, so our swimming lessons were there. And it was one of those swimming baths, I don't know, there may be people here who never went there, but even in the hottest of summers you could go in there and you'd be freezing. It was always cold, and it always stunk of chlorine, as though they'd put a bath full of chlorine and added a bit of water to it. I think there was more chlorine than water actually in there. And for those who did go there, just a memory to remind you of it. Do you remember them crates you used to have to put your clothes in them as well? Metal crates, so you put all your shoes in the bottom, and the boys used to just stuff all the clothes in them. There you go, there's a reminder. Brings back memories, doesn't it?
That was after it was painted.
Yeah. So you have the 3 foot end.
When it was modernised, that.
Yeah, 3 foot end and then the 6 foot end. Now, as you entered from Cheetham Hill Road, you sort of paid your money, you went in a bit and turned right. And there was a corridor that kept going, and me being curious, even back in them days when I was that high, wondered where it went. So me and my mate one day, without anyone looking, thought we'd go down that corridor and see where it went. And we ended up in this place at the back. And there was a second pool, a Victorian pool. There was no water in it, even when we went there in the 60s. But this is how it was.
And there was a lifeguard there.
Yeah. No, it did have water, but I'm saying when we went spying to see it, that it was all closed off. There was no water in it. But it would have had the changing rooms all around the pool. And you were a lifeguard there, you say?
Only for a short while,
Yeah. Teach how to swim. Yeah. Oh, memories for you then. Not very good memories, but. And next door to the swimming baths, there was a public hall. About 15, 20 years ago, this guy got in touch with me, Al Rowlands, to tell me about boxing in Cheetham Hill. And after the war, boxing was very popular in Cheetham Hill, and at the public hall, he regularly had boxing bouts going on there as well. And he wrote me a few letters describing some of his matches and things as well. And he sent me this bit of programme, but it doesn't say what year it is on here, unfortunately, but I think it may be the 60s. So carrying up onto the top of the hill now, so we got Heath Street, what was Heath Street then, to the left, Waterloo Road to the right.
Woodlands Road.
Sorry, what did I say?
Woodlands Road.
Woodlands Road.
Yeah, you said Waterloo.
Did I? Oh, okay, it's all the W's. We're at Woodlands Road. The Empress pub with the tower on there. And this is a similar spot to the opening slide where I had on the screen at the very beginning. And on the opposite side of the road, just out a shot from here, was a well-known landmark back in the day. I always used to just call it Rash. Well, they got a rash. And I thought, you think things as kids, don't you? And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if there ever was a fire there, it would all be ash. Used to think things along those lines. There was two. They had one on the corner of Heath Street, and they had that one on the other side, the Woodlands Road side. Yeah. I think this building is actually still here. I think it's a carpet shop. Yeah.
There were two brothers. There was Ash of Ankles.
Yeah.
And the two brothers were a bit
against each other. Competition, yeah. Yeah. So I used to enjoy walking past there and getting the smell of the wood, the newly cut wood. I used to get high on that. So Things you do as a kid.
I went in there once, Les, for a piece of wood to repair a rabbit hook or something when I was about 14. And he said, how long, a piece of 2B1, how long do you want it? I said, it's the Daily Mirror, cigarette packet with my thumb.
And you did it.
Took it all away.
And it was spot on. Yeah. You can't do that at B&Q these days, can you?
Les, the manager of there, up till it closed, was the guy that previously owned Lawrence Enos.
Oh,
Right.
oh, you're good, you.
Yeah.
Hey, you can come again, you.
Martin, you need to get up here one week.
I ended up living next door to Lorenzini.
Yeah.
The one who had the place after the library, not the other side
Yeah.
of the road. He was a right horrible, grumpy old man.
I just know him when I used to go as a kid, and he used to say to me, "Don't buy that picture, not to see."
Oh, sarsaparilla.
He only died about 6 years ago.
Okay, so onto the top of the hill now before you drop down into the rest of the village. Now I know there's certainly one person here who knows what this street is to the left. You've got Darlington Street. This is probably in the first or second decade of the 1900s. The Empress again there. And this, I don't know the reason why with this bank building, there was another one on there. This was an older one. I don't know what happened to that one, but if you look at the next slide, there was a white brick with stone building.
Yeah.
So where's your house?
Right
Right at the end.
Facing you, yeah. The
Yeah.
two windows on the right,
Right.
facing you.
Yeah, brings back memories for you then.
64.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So Darlington Street. I only ever went down there once because it had been a
The
cul-de-sac.
dead end, yeah.
Yeah, I think I went down with a mate once who knew someone who was down there.
Ballet school on the left-hand
Yeah.
side.
The corset shop.
So this row here is where what was the police station is now. I remember this last building was Trustees Savings Bank, where I had my very first bank account. Cheetham Hill, in its day, you could get whatever you wanted there. You didn't have to go into Manchester or anywhere else. And today, you can't get anything but takeaways there. So again, crossing over the other side of the road, like we do. Oh no, I'm ahead of myself again. Just bear with me.
It's gone the police station now, isn't it? It's gone.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the police station was on there. The building's still there, but not as a police station.
It's a community centre, isn't it?
Yep. And going back to how it was in the 1850s, Cheetham again has got no police station, or neither has any of the neighbouring areas, which we won't go there because that's another issue that is very contentious. So crossing over the road, Humphrey Street.
It's still there, yeah.
Laundrette was there, that's been there forever, that laundrette, I think. And on this corner, I remember you had a baby shop, and then you had Lennon's supermarket, and then you had Levy's. And just up there, you had the other police station that was there from the 1950s up until about 1970, probably 74, something like that. And then they pulled that down and put some sort of public toilets on the site. So this building's still there. The houses went a long time ago at the back there. There's the one at the police station. And that was into the loading bay of Lennon's supermarket, just through there. And this certainly is a sad case of how this building's been treated over the last couple of decades. But we all know the library, Crumpsall Library. What can you say about that? It's just a shell now, and even the shell's in a bad state of repair, with trees growing out of what's left of the gable ends. And just to remind you what the inside was like, the squeaky floors, marble floors when you walked on them, and you couldn't talk loud, otherwise the librarians would be shh, and it'd echo right through the whole of the building.
Miss Ackroyd would speak.
And if you dropped a book, boom, echo everywhere. And at the side of the library, on Paisley Terrace and Kitchen Bank, they had a ladies' toilets there. And the gents was on the front of the library, just back on the previous slide. You had to go down an opening in the railings, and it was underneath roughly where the bus stop was. So the gents are in there, you've got sort of skylights and feet going above you, and people walking across. Bit
My head
off-putting.
stuck between the railings and one of those pillars. While my mum was waiting for the bus, I was looking what was going on down there.
Okay, you can just see on this one actually, going back to it, the foundation stone, and this day and age it's very hard to read, but it dates back to 1909, and it was opened by the mayor at the time, Edward Holt, and he's the Holt from the Holt's Brewery family, and they were quite a renowned family in the area through the 1800s, 1900s. And then we just go along to the next block, Crescent Road, which is nothing like it is today, sad to say. You've got skulls, another great smell going past there. It was a mixture of cheese and sawdust. Sawdust on the wooden floor and the cheese. And coming round, I remember a wallpaper shop. They advertised Dulux paints on it, and I think there was a cafe on this corner. And on the other side of the road, the Chippy was on the other side. Les Jackson's, yeah.
There was a baker's shop on the other side.
I remember on the other side, the first shop was a barber's called Jack's, because when I was that high, my dad used to take me there to get my hair cut, and they had to sit on a board on the seat, like kids do, to raise them up a bit. I can remember really that area like it was yesterday, because you had another florist going up there, newsagent shop, the Chippy. They did great chips and puddings and gravies.
Yeah, it was the cotton plant, wasn't it?
Yeah.
At the beginning.
There was Seats Bakery and
Yeah.
a doctor's surgery.
The doctor's surgery was right on the corner where what was the Royal Bank of Scotland that's gone as well now.
Motor spares like it, wasn't
Yeah, the garage was after the Chippy on
it?
the
No,
right.
it was a motor spares shop at one point.
Shop as well. And then just coming round the corner from there, Titanics. And for those of you who don't know the story behind Titanics, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure you'll know, the guy who opened this was a survivor. He was going over to New York. He was rescued. He lived a while in New York, didn't like it, came back to Manchester and started the delicatessen stuff, and it carried on in
We
the
did
family.
compensation money.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one in Haywood, Street.
Waterloo Road after
One in
there.
South Manchester.
Yeah. The one on Waterloo Road's gone now, hasn't it? As well. Yeah. And then just working our way along next to Titanics, there was a pub called George. Brings back memories maybe for some. And that was just before Tyson Street. And then on the other side of Tyson Street, the Crumpsall Hotel. That was the older one. There's two on that site. That one was demolished in the late 60s, I think, when they built the newer one.
Yeah.
That has gone as well. And that was part of the shopping centre complex that was built in the late 60s that has since gone as well. And then over to the other side of the road again, and this is St Mark's Lane. Is Timpson still there, is it?
No,
Is it
no.
shop? No.
No.
Okay. This photo was from about 1959 as well. All these buildings are still there, it's just the shops that have changed really. And this is St Mark's Lane, down to where you'd have the church on the left hand side. And I've not been down there for a while, but in 2012 I was down there, and this building was there. And this was the old smithy for Cheetham Hill back in its day. I think there was some other engineering works in there as well, but originally it would be the smithy, and you'd take your horses there to get them hoofed
That's
as
just
well.
the beginning of the wall of the.
And that's
of
the church
Yeah, it's gone
yard
now.
as well, yeah.
It's an empty space.
But that is in such a bad state of repair, I'm surprised.
It's gone.
Has it gone now?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go then. I was going to say I'm surprised it's not been pulled
No,
down.
it's gone.
And this is a postcard that I've got of Cheetham Hill. And this again was probably around about 1910ish when this was. You've got King Edward's buildings, that's the spire from the Methodist church up near Halfway House. So this would be one half of Thomas Street and the other half just around there. And even though it's got the trams, they still had the horse-drawn carriages in them days. It's still a bit of a sleepy village, even in 1910ish. And then Thomas Street, you can see a bit of Woolies here. You know, the memory of Woolworths will live on forever. So Thomas Street going up to Arlington Street at the top. Tesco's is there now, yeah, taking over all that view. You can just see the gable end of my school, Cravenwood School, just sticking up there above the houses. And in this shot there was another cinema called the Globe Cinema, for those who remember that. It opened in 1912, that one, and was demolished late 60s when they pulled all that block down. Yeah, some great pictures of the old cars in these, aren't there, as well. And then you've got what was the cemetery there that is now the car park for Tesco's. And this one I took in 2004 when they were demolishing it all for Tesco's. The whole lot went. You can just see the edge of the last Crumpsall Hotel there. And good old Woolies. It was quite sad when they closed down, ceased trading, because it was as though Woolworths had been there forever. Finally, just to say thank you for listening tonight, and if you've got any questions, I'd be quite happy to try and answer them where I can. So thank you for listening.